All right, everyone, welcome to the SRP training for OASIS Plus contracts. For your information, OASIS Plus contracts we like to call non-mass, right? So that's a term that I'm going to be using throughout this presentation. So we're focused here really on just three things. This is kind of a condensed training, right? We're doing how to report your task orders, right? How to then report the monthly invoices associated with those task orders. And then finally, how to remit your contract access fee or CAF. So right up front, we are finding issues with the SRP software. We are requiring more functional testing before the next release, and we do ask for your patience and support and understanding in this process and your input as well to help make it better. So it's going to be this condensed, abbreviated training to give you the basics on how to report, and then we want to open this up to questions, right? We want to know what you see on your end and how we can fix the shortcomings that we might not be able to see on our end. So the slides, of course, will be provided. All the resources will be provided to you. You can go through that at your own pace. I will be going through these slides relatively quickly. The demonstrations, the live demos that I'll be doing throughout this presentation, I think is going to be a bit more useful. There's going to be a recording of this that gets posted, this most recent one, right, that we're doing today, along with the slides, and I think there's a few other resources as well linked in the OASIS Plus website. So that's the disclaimer, right? How we're going to get started. You see me on video. I just wanted to show everybody that I am a real person. But I will be turning off the video to save bandwidth, so this presentation can perhaps go a bit more smooth, right? So, okay, so let's go through the table of contents, right? So again, just kind of repeating what I said before, these are the topics that we'll be covering, pretty straightforward in that regard. And this is the resources page, right? So OASIS Plus SRP at gsa.gov is definitely the email that you want to send questions about OASIS Plus to. Anything regarding sales reporting or task order management, things of that nature, all go to the OASIS Plus SRP at gsa.gov email. Anything else regarding the SRP system itself goes to vendor support at gsa.gov. Things like login issues or right, or reporting issues, right? That the form doesn't get accepted, or if there's a like systems issues like that, that goes to the vendor support center. The SRP user manual, which is linked through the SRP landing page, is much more useful, I think, than this entire presentation, right? It goes into a good amount of detail on how to process all the actions that you need for your OASIS Plus contract in SRP with screenshots, listed step-by-step procedures. So that's actually a very good resource to keep as well. So let me just quickly go to SRP, the landing page. So you can see this here. When you go to SRP, here's the landing page. And under this little help dropdown, you'll notice that there's a GSA online help. So if we click on that, okay, it takes us to this page. SRP user guide. Now, as I mentioned before, OASIS Plus contracts are non-mass. So we see mass, that's the multiple award schedule type contracts. Then you have the GWAC MAC option down here. That is the non-mass. So we have the overview, task order management. It kind of goes into all the details of what you need, where to click, click here, click there. These are the fields I need to input to process, to report an invoice. All that information is detailed here, right? We're basically covering this information in a condensed way. So that's a good resource to keep on your favorites tab, right? So going back to the slideshow. Okay. And also this gsa.gov OASIS Plus website. So maybe one of the panelists can post this in the chat, but the resources website, this is the OASIS Plus website on gsa.gov. right? If you go to the resources link and you scroll down, you have things like Fed Connect, VSC registration, and then sales reporting portal, which is what we're talking about today. There's the user guide. This is the slide deck that I'm sharing. This mapping spreadsheet I will talk about throughout the slide. And then here's the recording, the actual video. So all the information you need is actually right here, right? You can just go here and download it yourself or share it with whoever needs to know it from your organization. Okay, so hopefully that gives you most of the tools, if not all the tools that you need. And of course, training, future trainings. We hold these events on a monthly basis. In the past couple of months, we've primarily focused on OASIS Plus contractors that had active task orders. We've since opened it up to all OASIS Plus contractors, right? To cover some of these points that I think with sales reporting that would be helpful to know if you just have a contract and perhaps not a task order yet, right? All right, so let's start with the requirements. So these requirements, it's on all OASIS Plus solicitations and contracts. You don't, it's a summary table. You don't need to go through it line by line. The important thing the main takeaway here is what's highlighted, right? Under these clauses and sections, we have monthly sales reporting and then quarterly CAF remittance, right? So everything is done on a quarterly or a monthly status. Okay, so what does that mean? Monthly, and it's 30 days at the end of the month, right? So it's always, and that 30-day deadline comes up again and again, right? So for sales reporting on a monthly basis, you have 30 days at the end of the month to report the sale on all active task orders. And that's the key. If you have a task order awarded to your OASIS Plus contract, that task order needs to be reported on within 30 days at the end of every single month. If there are no sales for that task order, then of course it's a $0 report that you must enter. And if you have no task orders for the contract, then there are no reporting requirements for the OASIS Plus contract. Now, for CAF remittance, right, when you pay the CAF, that is on a quarterly basis, although you can, of course, pay on a monthly basis if you so choose, but the requirement is quarterly. Again, 30 days at the end of the quarter, right? We want to emphasize the 30 days because the 31st day makes that payment or that report late, right? So just keep that in mind. Coming to your homepage, right? So we log in. When you log in, this is what you see, right? You can indent this column here, and it gives you a brief summary of all your contracts. So this is SRP, so it has your mass and your non-mass contracts will be all listed here. And it's very important, right? When we're talking about OASIS Plus here, make sure that we're selecting the OASIS Plus contract to take action on and not the mass contract, because otherwise sales get confused and adjustments take a very long time and very difficult to fix. Okay, so that's where your contracts are listed. And there's this brief kind of nice, overview of the deadlines. So in our example here, our current date is July 22nd. And because it's July 22nd, the payment due is July 30th. The monthly reporting deadline is also July 30th, and the quarterly reporting is July 30th. So this teal quarterly reporting box, we can effectively ignore. That's more for mass contracts, and even mass contracts are all switching over to TDR, which is a monthly reporting frequency. So that's no longer applicable. We don't, pay attention to that. What we want to pay attention to is when the payment's due and when the report is due, right? That's this rust color box and the gray box. In our example, because this is July 22nd, the end of the month, right? The end of July is the 30th. That's 30 days at the end of July to report June's sales. That's why it says the monthly reporting due date is July 30th. It's for June. And June also happens to correspond with the end of the second calendar quarter, which, if you tack 30 days at the end of the second calendar quarter, brings you to this July 30th deadline for payments as well. Remember, payments are done on a quarterly basis. Reporting is done on a monthly basis. It just so happens in our example that the dates correspond here, right? So this is a good way to keep track of what you're reporting, when you're reporting it, and how to stay on time. Timeliness is a criteria being evaluated by contracting officers, so we want to make sure that payments, reports are being done within that 30 days. A good practice is to do it a few days earlier. Processing time, system glitches that could possibly push the payment or the report late a few days. We don't want that, right? So if we know what needs to be reported, what the payment needs to be, getting it done early is always best, especially on $0 reports. So we will now go into task order management and how to add a new task order. The process goes, you must first add your task order that was awarded to your OASIS Plus contract before you can report on it, right? So this is the first step to getting any reports done in SRP for OASIS Plus. It is worth noting that for those of you who hold a mass contract, OASIS Plus is pretty different. OASIS Plus is reported on the task order. If you have an active task order, then you report. If you have no active task orders awarded, then you do not have a reporting requirement until you get a task order. You report on the task order level. Mass contracts report at the contract level. So I think sometimes that's where the confusion is, right? If you have no sales for your OASIS Plus contract, what do I report? Well, the first question is, do you have a task order? If you do, then you report the 0 on the task order. If you don't have an active task order, then there's nothing to do. There's no reporting requirement until you get a task order. Mass is very different. Mass, you would report the 0 on the contract itself. So that's the first key difference. We are going to go through how to add your task order, and we're going to do the difficult way first. The reason I do it this way is to illustrate what work you would need to do going the hard route before going the prescribed route, which is what we'll demonstrate next. So we add a new task order. So here's the file path. You click on add a new task order, the primary contracts. Various fields listed here will auto-populate. Here's a screenshot of what that looks like. When you type in your contract number, you select the domain of that particular task order you're going to enter, and more fields auto-populate. Then it takes you to this screen, which you see all the information up here is already pre-populated, and you will see what follows thereafter are many, many more lines of information. Now, it's a mix of drop-down menus and free text fields. And there's these little icons, information icons that give you a brief explanation of what is required to be put there. It's a lot of work to type in all this information and even more work to make sure it's accurate. But this is a way to add your new task order when you get it awarded. There is that requirement. When you get a new task order, you have 30 days to get that task order into the SRP system, and then it becomes reportable, right? That's why there's that 30 again, right? 30 days. So we want to make sure it goes in, and we refer to your award document. So here's an example of an award document. It's the 1449. Most of your award documents look like this. All the fields in the 1449 all the fields that are required in SRP are found in that 1449 form. So you would fill out all this information, and then scroll down, you attach the relevant award documentation, give it a name, upload it. You can delete it and make modifications thereafter. And at the very, very end of it, you scroll all the way down. You can submit that for validation. You have not that task order is not reportable yet, even though you did all this work, until we at my office validate that task order and all its fields to be complete. So that's actually very important to do, just to submit that task order at the end for validation. So I'm going to do a quick live demo of what that looks like. If we go to, I guess it logged me out. Back to the staging environment. So this is what you see as a contractor. Two-factor authentication. Okay, so here we have the landing page as a contractor. You'll notice the 3 blocks of due dates that we mentioned before. So under task order management, here's exactly what the process is for adding a new task order. You see add new task order, pretty self-explanatory. We click on that. We click on the OASIS Plus contract. In my case, it's this dummy contract. We select the domain for the task order I want to add. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's technical engineering. And we have these fields pre-populated. And then we have order number, which the system doesn't know, so you have to type that in, or description, domain CLIN, which is a drop-down. That's nice, nice and easy to choose from. And all these various fields that you would have to enter: start date, initial obligated amount, OCO agency, OCO name, so on and so forth. And then we add the files associated, the award documents associated with this task order by utilizing this function, and then uploading it, which is grayed out. And here it is at the very bottom, this submit button. At the very end, please do submit it for validation before it can get reported on. Okay, so when we review your task order, and if we need you to make corrections, we would likely reject the task order with a description of why it got rejected and send it back to you. When we send it back to you, please go through and make the necessary corrections again through the same process, right? Go find your task order, and once you make the corrections, submit it yet again for validation. So this process repeats itself until the task order is validated, after which case it becomes reportable. So that is how we add the task order using the manual the hard way. Task order modifications, very similar process. So this is the file path on how to add a new mod. And the page looks a little bit different. You'll notice the right-hand column for this mod, for adding a mod, is the base task order information. And the mod information actually goes on the right-hand column, right? The left-hand column is all task order information, and the right-hand column is the mod information. And you would, again, populate all these fields manually as you need within the 30-day time frame. And of course, add the appropriate mod documents the same exact way. And after you upload, you can still modify, you can still delete. And lastly, submit. Of course, submit, right? Same thing again, right? Just like the task order, you submit it for validation. We need to validate all the fields that you entered in the mod to make sure it's valid before that mod goes live in SRP. Okay, so quick demo of that. So it's the same exact process. So instead of add a new task order under task order management, I would go to add new modification. And so the mod is always associated with an existing task order that's hopefully is in the system. We select the OASIS Plus contract and then the active task order. So this was a task order I entered previously. And so this is the only task order that's available for actions when you have a mod. So here the mod number, if it's the first mod, the naming convention is P with 4 zeros and 1. Second one is 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. Drop down options for the mod type, mod description, give you the description. We have the start date and the end date, and the mod award date. Now, for those of you who might have attended one of my previous training sessions, I brought to your attention that there is a system issue with the dates and, it doesn't work quite well, so don't worry about the mods. That problem has since been fixed. The issue was that there was a data validation issue between the start date and the mod award date. Because the mod is tied to the base task order, the pop start and the pop end, it reflects the same dates as the task order. However, your mod dates say, if it was awarded today, 2/20/2/11, but the task order started a month ago, the system created an error message saying, well, the award date cannot be after the pop date, right? The pop date cannot be before the award date. And so contractors were stuck trying to enter the mods, and the system, the SRP just wouldn't take it. So that issue has since been corrected. So if you have a mod now and you want to enter it, feel free to do that. It should go through without a problem now. Again, mods, just like task orders, must go into the system within 30 days. So make sure we're doing that. If you get a mod awarded, you should go get in within 30 days and with all the fields validated and corrected. Okay, so that was the hard way to do things. Now we're going to switch over and talk about the prescribed way, the way things should work, should being the key word. So I want to make a quick statement here before getting into talking about SRP, FPDS and SRP, and that is, if you have a special reason that the OCO is not reporting that particular task order in FPDS, then you should reach out to Christy Irvin at the email here to discuss how to then properly put that particular order into SRP. The reason is these orders are special, and I use that word special as kind of code. If you have a special order, then you will know that you have a special order. The reason it's a special order is because this order, for example, cannot be made public, issued by, say, a 3-letter agency, for example. So that's a special order. If you have a special order, still reportable, right? It just needs to be carefully put into SRP, and Christy is our expert at doing that. So reach out to her if you have one of those. Otherwise, all other orders should be put into FPDS by the OCO, and that would then trigger a data push into SRP, which is the prescribed, the easy way to get your task order. So here are the fields. You notice the left-hand column here are the FPDS fields, and then the right-hand column on this chart are the required fields in SRP. That's a great preponderance. A majority of the fields that are required are already in existence in FPDS when the OCO puts that information in, and that pushes those fields into SRP and auto-populates that, which saves you a ton of time. And this is what the OCO already did. Certain fields like the domain CLIN, the domain itself, the predominant contract type, for example, you'll notice is not a field in FPDS, and that is something that you will have to put in yourself. Similarly, well, here's an example of what FPDS looks like, and you can double check this yourself. If you go to FPDS, it's a public website, and run a search for your task order and click on the view link. It'll open up that entry into these detailed fields, and that's where that information comes from. FPDS easy search is going away, but FPDS is still being utilized by contracting officers, so this information does still get pushed in from FPDS. Assist operates very similarly, assisted acquisitions, right? So assist orders will also populate in SRP. Data push comes through very much the same way. So predominant contract type, for example, an assist is a field that gets entered, so that does carry over and populate in SRP. So when those fields get pushed through, you must then review those orders to make sure that the information came through cleanly. And if they did not, or if there is an issue with any one of those fields, you have the capability of clicking on this little gray button, request change to lock fields, and that would open up all the fields to modifications, to changes, and you can make the appropriate changes then, right? And the same process flows through again with the validation. Same thing with mods. Mods code through the same exact way through FPDS, and the data push comes through the same way. So here's where I want to stop for a quick second for all the new contractors. This is, I think, where most of us get stuck. The review task order mod section of SRP is where likely your awarded task order is sitting. So if the task order has been awarded and it shows up in SRP within a reasonable period of time, let's say within 10 days, then that data push comes through and the task order is sitting in queue under your review task order mods option in SRP. I'll demonstrate this live in a second, but I just wanted to bring this to illustrate this point a little bit better. So when you go to this section, all your awarded task orders and contracts are sitting here. So under the action column, any task order that has this manage task order option means you need to take action on it. That means this task order has been either rejected for data issues, or it is a new task order that needs validation. So anything that says, if you have something on your list that says manage task order, take action on it because it's not reportable until you do. Ultimately, what we want to do, or rather what you want to do, is to have all your task orders go into this non-mass accepted status. And then the action there would only be to view your task order. That means the task order is completed, data is good, no more action needs to be done. Okay, so that's something that we need to pay attention to. Your new task orders are all, if you can't find them to report, they're still pending validation. So this is worth demonstrating. If I go back to the landing page, okay, so again, logging into SRP, task order management yet again, review task order mods. Once we click on that, this is where all my task orders are. So mods included, right? So if it's a view mod or view task order, and these are all non-mass accepted, I'm good to go. If any one of these requires action, right? If they're new or they got rejected, then I need to click on it to manage that particular task order or to manage that mod. So at the end of this training, double check, right? So you're in there reporting on a monthly basis or checking on a monthly basis. Make this a best practice to just click on the review task order mods to just double check to make sure that everything is still in good standing. I should note that when you get a new task order awarded and that task order doesn't show up in FPDS right away, not because it's a special task order, but because it's, let's say, for example, a DoD task order that might take more than 30 days to appear in FPDS, you're still bound by that 30-day reporting requirement. So that would be a good example of when to enter your task order the hard way, which is the add new task order option. Doing it that way will immediately create that task order and default it to this non-mass accepted status to report on, at the end of which eventually that task order will appear in FPDS and the data push comes through and the data fields get validated and we are back to the review task order status for data validation, right? Because what you entered into SRP at that time is so that you can start reporting on the task order in a timely fashion. But what comes then after, when the FPDS pushes that data through, is when we can finally validate the data, right? So we go through that round of data validation just at a later time. If we say, for example, in another example, if you get awarded a task order and within 10 days, the contracting officer puts that task order into FPDS and it shows up on your list that I'm showing here, Then you can immediately go to manage the task order, like I showed on the presentation, and select this to validate all the fields, right? If you're in a total agreement with all the fields that's entered there, enter the missing fields such as domain and scroll to the bottom, submit that task order for validation, and that should be good to go, right? Otherwise, you can make changes there. Of course, add attachments, the same process as before, but all the fields gets already pre-populated from FPDS. Okay. All right, so here's a few quick overview of all the different types of status, right, that appear in FPDS, in SRP rather. So non-mass accepted. Again, non-mass accepted is what we're going for at the end of the day. Every task order, every MUD should be in the non-mass accepted status. If it is anything other than that, that means there is action that needs to be taken. Non-mass review, new task order especially, if it was review task order, I mean, they're just variations of the same thing, right? Data elements need to be validated. Either the data push came from FPDS or you entered the data that differed from FPDS. We need to validate the data fields. Accepted to review is when the order gets pushed from FPDS or assessed, and there's discrepancies. The current practice is also, for us, it's easier for us to reject the task order and give it back to you to correct those specific fields than it is for us to go to the OCO to have them make the change in FPDS, unless it's a special circumstance where the order is just completely wrong and shouldn't be in FPDS to begin with. Then we would have to do some back end data changes to get that removed. But otherwise, anything that's in other than the non-mass accepted status requires you to take some action and submit it for validation. So I trust that's where most of the issue is. Here's a quick little decision tree, right, of what I described with FPDS data push versus if you add it in manually. You'll notice the end nodes of all these branches is in non-mass accepted status. That's the reportable status. So this is how the process flows. All right. So now that we've talked about how to get your task orders and mods into SRP, those task orders can now be reported on, and so we will cover two ways to report your sales. So I want to make it, I want to emphasize two important points, right? So one is the point that I've been making all along. Contracts without awarded task orders do not require reporting. If you don't have a task order awarded, you don't need to report. Right? We report on the task order level, not the contract level for OASIS Plus. And and we recognize revenue for OASIS Plus at time of payment. So this is a cash accounting practice for OASIS Plus, and this primarily has to do with the way that CAF is funded as a separate line item for the use of the task order. So cash is the way to report to recognize revenue. So if you invoice this month but didn't get paid anything this month, you will need to report a zero. If you get paid double next month, you would report it then, right? So that is how OASIS Plus gets reported on awarded task orders and on a cash basis. It gets zeros for task orders that didn't get paid for the month. And also very important, let's say you are late in reporting or didn't get your task order uploaded in time. You must report all past missed months before you can report the current month. So you would have to backtrack, start from the beginning of that task order's period of performance, and report those months to catch up to today's date before you can report on this month or the next month. So those are just a few key points to keep in mind. But again, reporting, right, it's just a function right above task order management on the menu. I can show you that in a minute. But the important thing to take away here is that, again, when you click on form entry, all your contracts, your mass contracts, OASIS Plus contracts, whatever other contracts that show up in SRP are all in SRP. So you want to make sure you select the right contract to make payment on or to make reports on. This is, again, a area where maybe some errors are, if errors are made, it'll be very difficult to move that money around. So we want to make sure we select the right contract number to begin with. Right, and then it takes you to, and this is a double check, right, to make sure the contract vehicle says OASIS Plus. It's got the contract number there. And then you start, and this is form entry, which is, utilizing the SRP system to manually type in all the information to report, invoice number, pay date, and then the task order. This drop-down menu will only have those task orders that are in non-mass accepted status, so you can report on. If they are not validated, or if they're new task orders that you didn't take action on, or they're task orders that got rejected for data issues, they will not show up on this drop-down. And if you wonder why, what happened to that task order, again, go back to the task order management tab under review task orders and mods. It's probably sitting there needing action. Right. And this slide emphasizes my earlier point about reporting zeros. If you have no sales, no payment for the month on active task orders, you must report a zero. The naming convention to report a zero is there. You can follow that. And make modifications, delete invoices, and you enter all this prices paid data. So line item ID, CLIN, CAF CLIN, these are drop downs. Most of these drop down. Line item ID is a free text field. That's up to you. You can choose something that makes sense, right? Ones, twos, threes makes the most sense. CLIN, SIN is a drop down. Skill level is a free text field. That's only for time and material type orders. Description of deliverables, that's a free text field. Unit of measure, there's only a few. I think if you click on the appropriate SYNCLIN, so there's whichever SYNCLIN you select, the unit of measure auto-populates. Quantity sold, that's a free text field. So you can play around with that and see what comes up. It should be relatively self-explanatory. Now, another very critical thing, right? So we add a new line, right? Always add a new line if you're done with one line and you have additional lines. Every single invoice, regardless if it's a $0 invoice or it's a firm fixed price type invoice or it's a time and material type invoice, every single invoice must have a CAF line. That's the D00 SYNCLIN. Everything runs off of CAF, right? So that's how SRP runs for OASIS Plus. We need a CAF line on every single invoice. So in a case of a $0 invoice, that CAF line obviously would just be zero. You would just put zero in there. The unit of measure is each. That auto-populates, so you don't have to worry about that. If it's anything other than a $0 invoice, and then you click through to accept. So this example we have here is something other than a $0 invoice. You'll notice that there is this kind of double check here, right? So the SRP CAF and the CAF CLIN. The SRP CAF is the estimated CAF, right? Those of you with maybe a legacy OASIS or HCAS contracts will understand what that means. Estimated CAF is basically a system calculated number. It takes this number, the 25,000 that you reported on your invoice, that is all the lines above the CAF line here, right? That total number multiplied by the fixed CAF rate of 0.15%. CAF is fixed at 0.15%. So system does a simple calculation, 2,500 multiplied by 0.15%, and that is the estimated CAF. The CAF CLIN is what you've entered down here. So that is the CAF that you charged or invoiced your customer. In a perfect world, well, in a normal world, 99% of the time, those two numbers should be the same. And we want to make sure that that's the case. So that's why there's a double check there. In extraordinary circumstances, there might be, for closeout purposes or something to that effect, there might be a difference. Usually not. So we want to make sure that that stays the same. All right. So And you can also add additional invoices or additional task orders, so you don't have to submit every single time you one entry at a time. So we can expand and add more lines, add more invoices, so you can go on and report everything you need to for the month if you have a lot of active task orders, right? So let me do, and modify, delete invoices. Let me do a quick demo on just how the form entry works for sales reporting. So if we go back to our testing environment here. Okay, so task order management, reporting is reporting, right? Form entry is the first option. We select the contract to report on, and that is my OASIS Plus contract. Invoice number, you type in whichever invoice number you have, and it has to be unique, right? The system rejects duplicative invoice numbers. The pay date is the date that, the pay date, right? That's pretty self-explanatory. Important note here, if you have a $0 invoice, the pay date could be today's date, right? It could be just the date at the end of the month or end of the quarter, what have you. It's arbitrary. It doesn't really matter. It's a $0 invoice, so you can choose an appropriate date there. The task order, again, this is the only task order that I have, so that's the only task order selectable. So any other task orders I think I might have likely is, still needs action. So we can add an invoice, and I've done that here. You can see the synclin is a drop down. We have the CAF as a option, the CAF special rate, which we rarely use, shouldn't really use. Zero invoice is FOO. A fixed rate is the HOO. Cost reimbursement, travel, indirect cost. And then what follows after the double O's is, you see how small this scroll bar is? These are labor categories for T&M type work. So lots of labor categories you can choose from. And if you do choose a labor category, we require a skill level. And that, if we, just for the sake of example, we choose construction managers, skill levels drop down, be journeyman, junior, senior, SME. This is actually relatively easy to navigate. So it's pretty good and pretty foolproof in that regard. Description of deliverables, you can put something in there. Quantity, right? This is all pretty self-explanatory stuff. So in my previous example, I think it was for, scroll too far, firm fixed price, right? So we can just type in something for description of deliverables and always have the CAF line for this particular invoice. And then on my example, invoice is 1324 here. So we can add more invoices. We can delete this invoice, right? We can add and we can report on a different task order if we need to. Whatever we need to do, we can do through this form entry, and then we would just submit. And so that's pretty user-friendly in my view. Next, we will do corrections, right? So of course you can make corrections, adjustments. If you made a mistake, you can go back and make corrections. Again, the right task order, the right contract number, and the right period is key here. And whatever you make corrections to will replace your previous entry, all the fields in your previous entry. So we want to make sure your corrections are done correctly. Does that make sense? And the brief questionnaire comes up thereafter asking you, answer it accordingly. How is error discovered, reasons for adjustments, and preventative steps. All right, so briefly again, just to demonstrate where that is. So for form entry, because this was a form entry, we can adjust the data. So adjust data corresponds to form entry. Select my contract, reporting period. I only reported on these 2 periods. Task order, this is the only task order I have. And here was another previous invoice I made. So I can make changes here. For example, maybe this was not the right labor category. Maybe it was supposed to be a compliance officer. So I can make the changes. And then once I submit this and answer the brief questionnaire, there follows, and I submit this, it'll replace what I previously had and maybe create a credit for CAF, right? So that's something that you'll see after you make the changes if you're changing dollar amounts. And if that is the case, we can take advantage of that credit on future payments or future reports. Or if it creates a deficit and there's CAF that needs to be paid, then it'll take you to the next steps to remit the difference. Moving along. Okay, so this is the second way to report your sales, and it's the file upload method. In my view, this method is very beneficial if you say you have a large volume of sales to report. If you have multiple task orders, or if they are T&M type contracts with many, many line items, it becomes tedious to input those lines again and again, month after month, if there's really not that many changes from month to month. Let's say maybe only hours and a change, and maybe a labor category gets added here or there. This is probably the way you would want to go. So you will need to download this template, right? And there's template I'll show you can be downloaded in like 3 different places. The key here is, again, we want to make sure we don't confuse this with a mass contract. This template is in the screenshot on the back here. You'll note that there's 3 tabs: the instructions tab, the mass data tab, and the GWAC tab. We want to make sure we use the GWAC tab. Right? That's the non-mass tab. If you put it in the wrong tab, well, that information gets reported to the wrong contract. We don't want that. Right? The other thing to note here is that we want to make no changes to this template whatsoever. This template will get rejected from the system if you move the columns around, or you delete a field, or you delete a tab. Do nothing to this template once you download it except add information. And the information can't be a formula, it can't be a macros, it can't be anything like that. It has to be just raw data that you input. And also in my example here, I color coded it for the sake of this presentation. Don't do that on yours, right? Don't put colors on there. So we have this contract, this dummy contract, invoices. So I have an example here of a firm fixed price. I have an example here of a T&M, and I have an example here of a $0 report for this particular task order. This is the information you would enter. It's all 3 text fields. It's an Excel spreadsheet, right? And this gets uploaded. So there is no drop down. There is no foolproofing this. You will have to be very sure and accurate with your information that you input here. Of course, this can be adjusted in the future, but you want to make sure this goes cleanly in the first time. So I will reference you for those T&M type orders. If we go to the SRP landing page, back to the help menu, reporting the data, file upload. If we scroll all the way down, oops, where is it? Supporting the file upload. There ought to be a J1. There it is. The file upload instructions. This goes into great detail of all the fields that you need to enter on that spreadsheet. And at the bottom here, we get the since cleanse, the levels of this. We go to OASIS Plus, section J1. This is where all the labor categories are, right? The SOC codes. You have the junior, journeyman, senior, subject matter expert. These are the levels of experience. If we click on this manual, this PDF, this is a standard occupation classification manual. Here is almost a 300-page document, but that's because it reiterates the same information in various forms. It really is probably only half of that. But here is where if you scroll to the bottom, your labor categories are. All right. So if you're doing T&M, we want to make sure you pick something, and this is the code. This is the SYN-CLIN code that you would use, and this is the labor category you would use. A point about this: for prices paid data, which this is, you want to make sure you capture the accurate information and not the all other. So management all other, or the all other categories are not descriptive enough, right? If you can choose something better, something more specific, we ask you to do that for T&M type sales. Okay, so after you do that, you upload the file, and under the reporting, you can download the templates, right? The template I mentioned before, that's where you would download the templates, give it a name, upload it, and if it gets rejected because of errors, or the system finds repetitive invoice number or something like that, it'll reject it and give you a reason. You basically go back, make the changes, and try again to submit. All right, so adjusting data is the same thing. You go to, under reporting, you adjust data by the file upload a new file, essentially, right, with the adjusted data if you need to. And the same thing happens with the questionnaires that you need to answer. So now you've reported you've reported your task order, you reported your sales. Now it's time to make payments. It'll show make payments. It's right under the payments option. So you can make your payments. It shows on the landing page your total balance there. The important thing to note again is, CAF is fixed at 0.15%. Pay within 30 days at the end of the quarter, though you can do that on a monthly basis as well if you so choose. So when you go to make a payment, you will notice that, let's see if there's a better screen that illustrates that we have this option to select the SRP CAF or the CAF CLIN or other. We recommend you select the CAF CLIN because that is actually what you invoice the customer, right? And in most cases, again, CAF CLIN should be the same as SRP CAF, which is the system calculated CAF. CAF CLIN is what you charge the customer. It's you're forwarding on that 0.15% to us, right? So that is the default, I would say, when you report your CAF or when you pay your CAF. Now, this SRP utilizes pay.gov to make this payment, but do not, and I must emphasize this, do not utilize pay.gov directly to pay your SRP CAF. Utilize this system, right? Use SRP. Do the sales report, click through all these buttons, make the payment this way, because this payment will then link that money to your contract or your task order. If you go to pay.gov directly and remit that amount, the systems people at the end will not know where to apply that money, and it will likely get lost for a very long time. So utilize SRP. Here's a brief definition of all the terms. CAF. Other is, well, we don't really use that so much. And that, again, extenuating circumstances, right? Closeouts or what have you, we would probably use that other. Right, so CAF CLIN, again, this emphasizes that point. Pay now, click through to the check boxes and submit, and then it'll take you to the payment options. The limits are there. Unlimited is ACH, debit card is limited to 25K, and PayPal is limited to 10. And you would put in your information accordingly, continue, and the payment will be submitted, and it'll show you the status of those payments. And if it all goes through, then the balance should be zero, right? There shouldn't be any balance outstanding. Things that are pending will take some time. So this is, again, my recommendation to get this action done early. Don't wait until the 30th day to do it. Otherwise, it could be late. All right, and then you can view the status. And that should pretty much bring us to the end of our presentation on how to report your task orders, report your invoices, and then pay your CAF. So now I will go into the questions to see if we have any in the Q&A. Let's see. So if we receive a task order and manually entered it in SRP and currently not in FPDS, do we need to let you know? No, you do not need to let me know. That task order, once you enter it into SRP, becomes reportable immediately. At a later date, that task order will get a data push from FPDS. Whenever the contracting officer gets a chance to enter that information, I will then get a notification to validate the data, because there might be some inconsistencies, right? Like case sensitivity, right? Agency might be Air Force, but FPDS says USAF, something to that effect. So that data validation is a process that I will do. And if I reject it back to you to correct something, you will still need to take action on that task order, even though you were reporting on it all along. Once that data validation comes, it'll put a pause on that until that data can be validated and corrected if need be, right? So again, just double check the status of your task orders and that under that review task order mods option, just to make sure everything's in good standing. Is there a guide to enter which fields are required for each SYNCLIN selected? For example, if it was stated skill level, but only was required for TNM. Yes, skill level is only required for TNM. So SYNCLIN, if you have a TNM type order, that SYNCLIN goes off of the labor categories listed in that SOC document that I shared out earlier, that J1, right? That's where you would select. You would select the most appropriate, the best labor category that you can. Again, barring those all other type generic labor categories. Try to be as specific as you can, and then apply the skill level. In the form entry sales reporting method, if you don't select the specific labor category, like if you select fixed rate or cost plus, etc., that skill level will be unselectable, right? So you don't have to worry about that. Skill level is only for TNM type orders. So review that J1 document for specifics on which labor category might fit best. Where can we download a copy of the SOC codes? That is, you can get that in the file path that I did on SRP. So if you go to SRP in the help menu, in the SRP help menu under reporting data, go to Mac GUAC file upload instructions. At the very end of that is the J1 document. Let's see if I can throw it in the chat here. Maybe that's just the easiest way to do this. So I'll put that in the chat. J1 documents for SOC codes is here. So feel free to download that and, peruse at your own pleasure. Okay. If we are advised not to use pay.gov, why is it an option? No, it does use pay.gov. SRP links through pay.gov. My instructions were to not go to pay.gov directly, right? Going directly breaks that link between your contract and the payment. SRP, if you go through the reporting process in SRP, it then takes you to pay.gov while creating that connection so your payment can be associated with that task order, with your contract. Going to pay.gov directly, independent of SRP, will lose that and that payment will be lost. That's why. No, it's absolutely, pay.gov is absolutely what we use, just not by itself, right, through SRP. What happens? Let's see. What happens when the system will not accept the mod entry unless the pop start date and mod award date are the same? Doesn't match. So this issue with the pop start date and the mod award date should no longer be an issue. We've tested it. It is fixed. Yes, it is fixed. If it is still an issue, if you are trying to enter this and it becomes an issue, take a screenshot, send that in an email to oasisplussrp.gsa.gov. We'll take a look at it. But as far as I understand, in all the testing that we've done in the fixes, that should no longer be an issue. You should be able to accurately put in the correct mod, pop date and mod award date. Question from the government side. I have a couple of questions regarding O+ as it pertains to HCAT's availability to award vehicles against it. Who would be a good POC to talk about that? I will leave that to Christy. There is definitely an office that handles customer outreach. So I don't know off the top of my head. Certificate of attendance for your records. I have CPE requirements annually. I don't think we have CLPs for this presentation. I could be wrong. Any other questions or concerns? We're at time, but I'm willing to stick around if we need. Feel free to keep asking. we shouldn't use SRP CAF payment option. Perhaps it can be hidden someday where those are, oh yeah, Limbo Louisiana. Yeah, I mean that could be an option. I mean it's there because, well, it's hard to get into the details of why it's there, but yes, it is there an option. The CAF option, the CAF CLIN option is again the prescribed way. The SRP CAF is, yeah, we'll we'll cross that bridge one day, I'm sure. Yeah. I'll be able to see my task order in SRP via review task order mods. However, when I go to add new modification, it doesn't show up on the drop down lists. Okay. So if your task order is in the review task order mods option, the next thing to check is it, what status is it in? Is it in non-mass accepted status? Because if it's not in non-mass accepted status, that means that task order needs action, data validation most likely. And that's why it's not showing up in the drop-down list. So even though it's there, you know, action needs to be taken. Bring all task orders, all mods into non-mass accepted status. Anything that is not in non-mass accepted status requires action. And it's 99% of the time, it's data validation. You need to submit it for data validation or you need to make corrections. Yes, non-mass review. Yes, non-mass review is data validation. We are looking through it and we will send you back either a rejection or an acceptance, and we just kind of go through it until we clean up all the data. When is your next training? How do I register as a vendor or seller? That is industry outreach. Next training is next month around the same time, I believe. So that should go out. In the slides, the second slide had all the resources for in addition to all the training. So you can use that link to register for the next training. There it is. Thank you so much, Cynthia. March 11th, 1 p.m. Eastern. Registration is there. Perfect. Awesome. Attendance email for confirmation of attendance. I leave that up to the trainers to see if that's something you guys can provide. Nothing that I'm aware of. Okay. All right. 203 brings us to the end. Thanks, everybody. Feel free to jump on again next month. We'll cover the same information. Bring whoever you like, and find the information at the OASIS Plus Resources website. Thanks, guys.